Well, good morning, everybody, or at least it's morning while we're taping this. I'm Beth Schibley, and I'm here with another caregiver conversation. And today I'm being joined with Corina who's going to talk today about solo aging. Corina, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Thank you. I appreciate being asked. My name's Corina. I work with Total Longterm Care Consultant Services, the big one, and we provide care management services in the community. I'm a licensed insurance agent. I do Medicare. I'm a board certified patient advocate, a certified dementia practitioner, and a registered guardian. So I do a lot of the non-medical related items for seniors. That's my focus, my passion.
Great. Sounds like you can plug and play a lot of different places where with people who aren't exactly what we're going to be talking about today, which is solo aging. And you have a very interesting take on it that, we're all solo aging.
Today we are going to talk about solo aging and caregiving. So why are you here? You're listening to this because you're preparing for your own care. You're caring for a loved one now, and you're looking for ideas and support, or you're learning in case you're called upon to care for a loved one in the future. And caregiving it runs from A to Z. Some of the things people don't think about as being a caregiver, financial support. It's not just the hands-on care. You can pay bills for somebody. You can drive them to the doctor. You can visit them once a month. You can call them every day at 9 a.m. Or you can move your dad in with you. Those are all different ways of caregiving. You can take the trash to the, corner for your neighbor. That's caregiving. So caregiving is a wide variety of things. And in Florida, we're mandatory reporters. And there's actually a Florida statute that defines caregiver. And it means a person that has been entrusted with or has assumed responsibility for the care or the property of an elderly person or disabled adult. Caregiver includes, but is not limited to, relatives, court-appointed or voluntary guardians, adult household members, neighbors, healthcare providers, employees, and volunteers of facilities. There's a wide variety of people who are caregivers that don't even realize they're caregivers. And
yeah,
when somebody...
I found that really interesting, especially when you talk about, the care or the property of an elderly person. So you're right. Somebody who decides they're going to take out the garbage or help, somebody who's not getting paid to mow the lawn, but just a neighbor who decides, oh, I live next door, I'll just mow their lawn. You're in effect caregiving. And there's rights, there's responsibilities that come with those things, aren't there?
Yes, so that you've been entrusted or have assumed responsibility for the care of the person or property. So it's, help your neighbor is a wonderful idea, but in some cases it can be a liability. So we can't ignore situations because that is also an issue, as Florida is a mandatory reporting state. I've dealt with cases where people knew of things and they let them go to the point where DCF was called in, and they were actually, almost charged with, not reporting the situation. So it's important if you see something, nobody wants to call on your neighbor. But if you're helping somebody and you see they need more help than just what you're able to give, you have a responsibility to reach out to the community resources. You don't have to call the police. You can call Aging Matters and say, my neighbor needs a ramp or whatever. And we'll talk about resources at the end that you can contact that can.
And we are, mandated reporters, and it's not just mandated reporters of abuse or neglect perpetrated, but it's also mandated reporters of self-abuse. And so we have to be paying. So, just because there's nobody in there taking their money, taking somebody's money, or acting in a bad way towards a person, we have to be paying attention to, there's self-abuse and neglect.
Yeah, self-neglect is a big one for
Yeah.
those independent seniors.
Absolutely.
Okay, so caregiving is everywhere you look now, at least in my world it is, and more people are hearing the word caregiving. And we want to know, why is this such a big deal now? You never heard this, or only people in certain fields or areas would hear the word caregiver. But the sheer numbers, the baby boomers were booms. It was a population boom. That's why they got their name, baby boomers. And
Right.
so the numbers of people that are aging now into what we call senior and elderly, over 65 and in the 80s, this population is just going to grow. It's just so large that it's making an impact on our society. The wonders of modern medicine, healthcare, it's amazing. You don't die from issues, critical health events, or other illnesses that you used to die from. Now we can keep you alive and treat them, and
Right.
they become chronic illnesses. So people are not dying. And so this population is going to stay big. It's not going to whittle down. It's going to stay big for quite a while. And life
Right.
expectancy is increasing. For a baby boomer, the life expectancy is about 78.3. If you're born today, that life expectancy is in the 80s, 82, 83. So it's going up. So the longer you live, the longer you're likely to live. And there are more seniors than those who care for them. We're going to talk about societal changes. And seniors, the population out there now is not having as many children. So there aren't as many younger people to care for this booming population. Families are separated. So if you had children or cousins or aunts or just family, sisters and brothers to help you as you age, we're all separated now. So we're more what we're going to talk about today, solo agers, which is seniors that are living alone and aging alone in the community, and not living with family, specifically taking care of them.
Well, I have to say, I have absolute memories of my mother and grandmother and myself going over to help my grandmother take care of her mom. It was generational. We all lived up the street. I grew up next to my father's mom and dad. My mother's mom and dad lived 20 minutes up the road. My cousins lived around the corner. That's not true anymore. I have one sister that lives in California, another one that lives in Massachusetts. I'm in Florida. We're so much more far-flung today, and it's just a different world.
Yes, and you talk about caregiving. I can remember my great-grandmother, she lived with my aunt, my great aunt, and all the siblings went out, some provided food, some provided this, some provided that, and she lived with one of them, and they all contributed to keeping her healthy, safe, and alive for as long as she lived. But that's because they were all in the same town.
Right, exactly. Somebody would go over and take great grandma to the doctors. Another one of the siblings would mow the lawn. Another one of the siblings would make sure she was up and took her medication. Another one would come do her hair. That was just what you did. It was just sort of part of your day. And I think also part of it was that at the time, my grandmother and my mom did not work outside the home, which I think we're also going to talk about a little bit too today, I think. But, I mean, when my great grandmother when I was a very young girl, my mom would go along with my grandmother. We would all go over to great grandma's partially because we had the time during the day. My mom wasn't working 9 to 5. Things changed when she went back to work outside the home. So that's another change.
And even if they lived alone, every Sunday you would go, your mom, you could go as a family. We're going to go bring grandpa or grandma their food, and they'd put it in the freezer or package it up and then do the lawn and do the laundry or whatever. People would visit once a week. Well, when you have people working 8 hours a day, children in daycare, on the weekend, they're shopping, cleaning house, doing all this other stuff for themselves. They don't have a day of just, I'm going to go do all this caregiving for somebody else.
Exactly.
It's a whole different situation. And our population is changing. In 1960, 9% were over 65. In 2015, 15% were over 65. And the baby boomers, they're still aging in. The first baby boomer that boomed into 65 was 2011. So we have a 20-year transition there for that generation. And so we're just now hitting the peak of those numbers where, we're going to start going on the downside probably next year. But that 15% is going to go up. And in 2060, we're going to have 3 times the number of 85-year-old plus as 2015, because the people that are aging 65 are still going to be alive. That the end of that baby boom and the millennials will start aging in to 65. It's just going to be a huge population shift. So that's why everybody's talking about caregiving. That's why there's so much focus now on electronics, the help, the facilities to put them in when they can't live alone. I mean, it's just, you have to build all this infrastructure. In the 40s, 50s, and 60s, it was building schools, elementary schools and middle schools and high schools, the Happy Days era, if you're familiar with that show. We had cars, there was just this growth of all this baby and children and teenagers. And now it's going the other way. Now it's seniors and elderly, and good health care and proper lifestyle. You are going to be living a long time, whether you want to or not.
Well, and
so how is this generation different? So
go ahead.
Okay, yeah, we're getting to that part now where we've talked a little bit about. In 2011 is when the first boomers turned 65. So 1946 or later. Well, as a care manager, I deal with people who are 95 who were born in the 20s, late 20s still. I mean, these people are in their 90s and they're still alive. So in the 40s, that's 20 years later. So there's going to be a lot of 95-year-olds. In the 1970s, there was a huge shift in our society with women's lib, women gaining independence, not being, at home like they were before, where they didn't really have much option. They were at home. Birth control came into existence in the 60s and was really made common in the 70s. Divorce started happening where it didn't happen before. Single families started popping up. I mean, there was a huge stigma everybody can remember the Archie Bunker show on, you know, single moms and that whole thing. If you watch the show Mad Men on TV, it just is a shocker. I was alive during those days, you know, as a child, and I was a little younger than, I'm not a baby boomer. It depends on what you look at, but I'm at the far end of it if I'm included. Otherwise, I'm a millennial or a Generation X. So I can remember women being at home and not wearing pants. And, you know, when I started working in the 80s, I went to work and women couldn't wear pants to work, and women, you know, had to wear hose, and there were just rules for women that weren't there for, you know, nowadays people would have a stroke over it. You know, I was slapped on the butt more than once in the workforce as an engineer and whatnot. So society has had huge shifts, and the amount of children that were born are significantly less, and people were having children later. So instead of having children in your 20s, you had children in your 30s, and that impacts a lot of this as well. And then
I think that shifts too with having children when you're in your 30s means you have younger children as you age. Whereas my mom and dad, they were, by the time they were in their 40s, their kids were, we were all teenagers and out of the house. Whereas if you decide to have, so their parents that were in their 60s and 70s at that point, they had just a little more capacity than you would if you had an 8-year-old in the house. Having an 18-year-old and having an 8-year-old, two totally different kinds of parenting. Not that one is easier than the other, but the hands-on, have to pick somebody up, have to have a sitter, have to, you know, all of those pieces that come with having a young child. So that sandwich generation thing comes a lot more into play now, in addition to all of these other things. And you're so right about smaller children, smaller family sizes. My grandfather had, well, you know, I mean, it was a large Catholic family. So I think my grandfather had 13 or 14 of them in the household. And my grandmother had 6 or 7 brothers. And then, so when my grandmother would go over to spend time with her mom, her brothers would also help sometimes. So you could spread the job out across more than one person, because you had a lot of siblings that all lived close. That doesn't.
Yeah, and like you say, they were younger. The late baby boomers like myself, say you were born in 1959, 1962. That's the end of the boomer range. You know, you could still have kids in high school and have parents that are aging, and you've, like you say, the sandwich generation, and your kids aren't leaving the house.
Yeah, that's true.
And then you would have Generation X, which are having kids later. You know, there's women having children in their late 30s and 40. And so those people are caregiving for parents and grandparents. I mean, that sandwich generation, that's a tough situation to be in. Or you are raising grandchildren. I mean, with the changes in society, a lot of grandparents are raising grandchildren. And so you have grandchildren at home, your kids aren't around, and your parents are aging. I mean, it's pretty tough. Yeah. It's a whole different world. So if you're looking at today's generation, they're expected to live to 83 and 85, where the baby boomers, their life expectancy is 78. Now I read, did another presentation last week where I focused on this. And if you live to be 65, your life expectancy is 18 years. If you're turning 65 now. If you are turning 75 now, your life expectancy is 12 years. So you gain 4 years just by surviving that 10 years. And with modern medicine, you can live to be 95. I have quite a few, these are the clients we get where they're 95. They've outlived everybody. They've outlived their spouses, their family, their children, and their grandchildren are helping them because the middle generation is gone. So it's shocking when you live to be 95. There are a lot of people that are younger than you. And there's a lot of things that can happen. And the people that live to 95 are just going to increase as modern medicine stays, as proactive as it is. Widowed men remarry more than widowed women. So widowed men are, they were married, they're widowed, and they're used to having that companion. So they bring someone in to be their caregiver and their support system because they've always had that. Widowed women tend to want to not be in that position, and they've been there, done that. So they're not as likely to remarry. So again, they're living alone. And then you have unmarried couples. That's like common now. Even with the boomers, it's amazing how many people, they've been together for 20 years since their 50s, they're in their 70s, but they're not married. No one knows it because they've been together that long for whatever reason.
Well, I think there are financial reasons, there's family reasons, there's all kinds of reasons why people, it just might not make sense for them to actually go get the license.
Yes. Yes. But that complicates things as you age because of the legal stuff.
Oh, absolutely complicates things. In the end of life.
Yeah. So what is solo aging? So the definition of solo is for or done by one person alone, unaccompanied, companionless. But I think of solo aging in a broader sense because each one of us is unaccompanied and alone as we age in our own way, because each one of us ages individually in unique ways from one another. So you've been married for 50 years, but it doesn't mean you're both going to age the same way. So some examples of this are spouses living together and each of them or one of them has dementia or Alzheimer's. That's very isolating because you're unable to communicate the way you were once for both sides, the one with it or the one without it.
It's isolating for both of them. It's isolating for the person who has the dementia, the Alzheimer's, and it's absolutely isolating for their spouse or their partner.
Right. And a debilitating condition such as Parkinson's, that is physically debilitating, or, cancer that is reoccurring. I know someone who lived with cancer for 12 years. It was completely debilitating. Her life took a completely different turn than her husband's. And that can obviously affect both of you, but you're both aging very differently and independent of each other, even though you're living together. So you can lose your hearing, you can lose your vision, you can have very different health conditions, and that isolates you from each other, even if you're married and living with your spouse. You can be living alone with a big support system. So I know of seniors that are in their 80s and they live alone in their condo and they have professionals supporting them. They have family, they have friends. You would never know, that they were living alone because they have everything's caught up, taken care of. They're on the ball. You can be living in a assisted living, or you could be living with a spouse or a roommate or whatever, and you could be emotionally isolated. So it's just you're living alone. Then there's the complex, which is pretty common these days, of blended families with yours, mine, and ours, where there's plenty of people around, there's plenty of people in and out, but there's no real support. You know, she may have had 3 kids and he doesn't have any, and her kids take care of her, but they don't take care of him, or the other way around. His kids are around and they take care of him, but don't take care of her. There's all kinds of family dynamics that go into that.
Yeah, especially when you're dealing with situations where there's, like you were saying before, about people who are getting remarried or cohabitating together and not necessarily getting remarried one way or the other. And there can be some bruises, sore spots with family, with children, when mom decides they're going to move in with the neighbor down the street, or when dad decides that somebody other than mom's going to move in because mom's been gone for a while. And then I've certainly seen and heard of situations where there hasn't been a marriage, and the second, the partner passes away and there's nothing written legally. So all of a sudden, I've been, Susie and John have been living together for 15 years since Susie's husband died, and John moved in. Susie's husband died 20 years ago and John moved in 15 years ago, but they were never married, and John was never on the deed or any part of the house. And all of a sudden now Susie dies, and John is sort of, looking at Susie's family, and Susie's family is saying, you're not our dad, and so sometimes
it gets complicated. I can tell you horror story after horror story. And that's why later on we're going to talk about what there is to talk about.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about what is there to talk about to plan for this solo aging. Well, there's a lot of talking to do. So here's 2 pictures, and a picture says 1,000 words. So here's a couple on the beach. They're 65, just moved to Florida last month. They're happy walking on the beach. They're out of the snow of New England or Michigan or wherever, and life is grand. And, they have their retirement planned out. So, the next 18 years, we're going to do all this. Well, here we are 35 years later. 35 years later. I mean, think of 35 years. That is a long time. When you're born to be 35, there's a lot of changes that go on in those 35 years. And when you're 65 and aging to 100, there are as many significant changes. And what's the likelihood that they were prepared for this, planned for this, and there are resources still available for this? I mean, there's been a lot of water under that bridge. So
I know that when I lived in New England and I worked in the senior services world, I worked in northern New England, and there were a lot of people that worked and lived in the Boston region or Connecticut, and thought it would be wonderful to retire to northern New Hampshire, without necessarily thinking about the fact that in northern New Hampshire, you might have to drive 45 minutes to get to a decent grocery store way up north. If you're going north of Concord, north of Plymouth, New Hampshire, if you're getting way up in there where it's beautiful and there's these gorgeous gentleman farms, but you could have to drive 15, 20 minutes one way to get to even a tiny grocery store, and farther than that if you wanted to get to a bigger one, or a doctor's office, or God forbid a hospital. So you're right about people needing to pay attention to the fact that this seems like a good idea at 65, but you might want to think about where you move into, because at 100 it's going to look very different as to whether or not you want to be in this farm 15 miles west of East Overshoe.
Exactly. And it's hard to make that change when you're 80 years old.
Exactly.
I mean, in this situation, I mean, nobody knows how long they're going to live. You can't live your life in fear or anxiety over the future, but you need to think about the possibilities, and that's kind of where we're going with this.
Yeah.
So aging is normal. You age from 0 to 18, there are humongous changes every month, every year. And when you age from 65 to 83, that 18-year time frame is usually as significant as the 18 years, the first 18 years. So the changes are fast. The changes have greater impact. As you're living it, you don't notice it because you're preoccupied with whatever it is you're doing. When you're 0 to 18, all you want to do is get to 18. The next thing, the next thing, the next thing. And when you're 65 to 83, it's like all you're looking at is, I want to do whatever. Things are slowing down and you're trying to keep that same pace, and you usually can't. Just the fact of aging, we won't go into this in great deal. I have a whole other talk on this, but as we age, we might have the same mental ability, we may have great physical ability, but as we age, we slow down. So our bandwidth is shrinking, even though we're able to do everything that we could do at 55. It just takes us longer. And
Yeah.
that's if you age well and you have no issues. And
One of
then
the
you
things,
throw in a few issues here, a few issues there, and that affects you even more.
one of the things I noticed was you were talking about 0 to 18 and then 65 to 83. Corina, it just hit me, 0 to 18, there's somebody home generally. If you're living in a reasonable family structure, from 0 to 18, you've got somebody that's putting a roof over your head, that's putting food in your belly, that's making sure you're getting what you need to have. 65 to 83, those people ahead of you they're not necessarily there anymore, and so that's the caregiver part. The changes that happen between 0 and 18 are humongous. You're absolutely right, and so are the ones between 65 and 83, but it's who's there to help that's really the difference here.
Right. When 0 to 18, you're going from sorts of things. And then when you're 60, you're getting less help as you age from 0 to 18. And as you age 65 to 83, you need more help. So you start out independent and then you need more and more assistance. And we shouldn't think of losing ability because that's a negative thing. It's just changing ability. We don't think of it as negative when you go from 0 to 18. So why do we think of it as negative when we go from 65 to 83? It's inevitable. We're all going to do it. It's the American, independent Superman, Superwoman. We've got our egos. We're a proud people. Humans are just that way by nature.
Right, and it's a youth culture. We're we don't necessarily do this third of our lives as well as other cultures do.
Right. And it's unfortunate because it's inevitable. I mean, we're all going to age. We all see the 80 or 90-year-old who's sharp as a stick and volunteers at the food bank or the thrift store at the church or whatever. But there's a lot of things they aren't doing that they used to do, unless they're the rare, 1 or 2% that maintain that age well. So here we go. Think, plan, and talk. Think about aging, plan for aging, and talk to those who will be supporting you about aging. It should not be taboo. You should be able to talk to your children, your spouse, your friends, your extended family, about aging. It's not a bad thing. I mean, my sister's plan is for, you know, my nieces and nephews to take care of her because she doesn't have children. And she's told them that. She's like, I'm involved in your life because I'm going to need help one day. I'm helping my elders and I need you to help me. So that is a conversation relationship that's being built. Now, whether they do it or not, that's a different thing. I live in Florida, and I know when I need help, all of my family is in New England. At some point, if I want them to assist me and I need assistance and I don't have the funds to pay privately for that, I'm going to be moving back up to New England, which, you know, is just a fact of life if my family's going to care for me, because they're not coming to Florida. They all hate it. So you need to talk to people. Don't be afraid to feel this out. And then you need to understand your genetic history. Genetics plays a big part in everything. So you need to understand your both family side, what you tend to favor, but it doesn't matter because you could favor the other one as you age. So understand your genetic history as far as illnesses. You know, grandma was great until she turned 85 and then everything just went nuts. Or, you know, when they were 65, they had all these chronic illnesses, but they lived to be 95. And then there's other people who die suddenly, you know, heart attacks, everyone dies at a certain age. In my family, all the men on my father's side die before they're 60, every single one of them. It's shocking. And so my father died at 56. His cousin died at 56. His uncle died at 57. So all the men in the family die before they're 60. That's just a fact of life. So you got to know your genetics. And fewer people die suddenly than from chronic conditions. And that ties in with the health care. If you are going to a doctor and you are being seen every year by a physician to monitor you and do the preventatives and all that Medicare provides, and that's why they provide it, is so there aren't these huge costs with major events. That's a whole other subject. But fewer people are going to die from a sudden event than from a chronic condition. So we are going to age alone and slowly over time. So you need to understand how you want to age as opposed to your spouse. I mean, obviously you live together, you've been together for however long, and you guys understand each other, but somebody may have very different, you know, opinions on, it's okay, I'll go to a nursing home and be on a feeding tube and have oxygen. And the other one's like, no, if I can't get up and go to the beach every day and do my beach walk, then that's when I'm ready to go. And those are choices that we have to make individually and prioritize what's important to us.
And I really think that the conversation needs to be, there needs to be that out loud conversation. You know, in addition to just so that we understand where each other's coming from, but also so that we can make sure that those wishes are taking place. So those are, you know, that's another conversation that, you know, the think, plan, talk. You know, I mean, we can't just assume that people are going to know what we want. It's really important to make sure that people know where and to remove that burden. You know, don't
exactly.
The last thing I want is for my kids to be saying, gee, does mom want this? Or does, you know, or my grandchildren to be saying, you know, gee, you know, would grandma want us to do this? I don't want that for my kids and my grandkids.
Well, with modern medicine, just because we can doesn't mean we should. And, you know, we can keep people alive for a very long time with modern medicine. but that doesn't mean we necessarily should in every case. And it's individual choice and decision as to whether we want to go down that road. And you need to, and we'll talk about this a little later too, about the best thing you can do is let somebody know
Right.
what it is that you want, because if it is wrenching when you are called to the hospital and you're the healthcare surrogate and you have to decide whether you're going to pull that plug or try this treatment or do this next thing. Those are
Right.
very difficult situations. And like you say, I don't want somebody to have to make that decision and wonder if it's, did I do it too soon? Did I do this? What would she want? And so I want them to know what
Right.
I want.
The other piece is that to try to make those decisions, even if you're capable of making those decisions yourself, to make them during that time of crisis is an entirely different headspace than doing it when you've got time to think about it and be clear and really weigh all the options. So, when you're standing in a hospital room or you're lying in a hospital bed, you're not thinking clearly necessarily about all of the different. So the first time you think about it had better not be then.
Oh,
We all have the right
exactly.
to change our minds and decide we want to do something different, and that's perfectly okay. That's not what I'm saying. It's just we need to think about it before we get to that point. You don't want to think about whether or not where you're going to stay during a hurricane as they're giving you the evacuation orders. You don't want to be putting your go bag together, that day as the cops are pounding on your door.
Right, exactly. And that's why they talk being prepared before the disaster. And this is the same thing. You need to be prepared before an event happens. And
Right.
then we've talked about this: as you age, your brain starts shrinking in our 60s. That's medical research, and it doesn't matter how sharp you are, it does start changing. And there's only about a 5% population that it doesn't really happen at the rate that it happens in everybody else. And there's research that's being done on that to see if they can figure out why that is. But 95% of the population, you can go online. And I had a friend who's like, I couldn't believe this. Like, you lose a certain percent of your hearing every decade. And they can tell you how old you were based on your hearing. And they just didn't believe it. And so they had a whole bunch of us go, oh, you got to go do this. I can't believe this is right, blah, blah, blah. And you go and took this hearing test online, and they can tell you your age within 2 or 3 years, just based on your hearing and your sense of, how you respond. So
do rock concerts in my 20s and 30s count? Because I don't know,
I know all of us that are walking around. Well, and it's even worse now. In my day, it was the Sony Walkman. You have and now everybody's with their ear buds in. The hearing there's going to be a world of people walking in isolation in 40 years. The hearing loss is going to be much more than it was with other generations. So think, plan, and talk. That's going to be our theme. So what is there to talk about? Well, who will do the right thing when it comes to it? Who do you want to do the right thing when it comes to it? And these are not always the same person. And the only way you're going to know that is by talking. I mean, a lot of times you instinctually know that this person isn't going to be able to do, hold up. But, I've been in attorneys' offices who do estate planning, and they say, people come in and it's like, oh, the oldest son or the oldest child or whoever, is the oldest is the one who's going to do this. even though they're the worst and they're philanderers and they gamble and all this stuff, it's going to be a mess. But they're the ones who, this is going to wake them up and make them do it. No, it's not. It's, you know, think about who will do the right thing. Think about who you want to do the right thing. Talk to both of them and then decide. The best thing you can do is all the legal stuff, which is the healthcare surrogate, the advanced directives, the living will, pre-need guardianship. So if you need guardianship, this is one of the most awful things about what I do is when people lose capacity, it's gone. I mean, you cannot choose who you want to help you anymore. It goes to the court when you've lost capacity, and you don't want that. So pre-need guardianship, DPOAs, POAs, these are all things that have risks and issues with them. So you don't just sit down and just do it in an hour. You need to think about it, and you need to understand the implications of putting somebody as your POA, etc. Financially, what are your resources? You know, we saw that picture of that man at 100 years old. Well, what are the odds of him having enough money to support himself? The people that retired in the 90s have a Social Security check of $1,400, $1,800. And if you have lived through all your savings over the last 20 years and you're trying to live on $1,800 a month, that's not going to work. If you are a married couple and you have two Social Security checks and they're both $1,400 or both $1,800, and one of the spouses dies and half of that money goes away, that's a change. You know, when you lose half of your income, what insurance do you have?
Yeah, but also people are, you know, I mean, you know, today's kids also, you're going back to what it is we've talked about before. I mean, we're laying out a lot more financially for our care because we don't have, you know, grandma going over to visit great grandma. You're going to have to pay somebody to clean the house. You're going to have to pay somebody to take you to the doctors or to do, you know, to do your hair or to, you know, all of those things. Those are paid caregivers. And so that's an expense if you don't have that superstructure around you. And additionally, pensions are going away. You know, the generation of that, you know, the greatest generation, and that preceded the boomers, they were very much savers. They were children during the Depression, or just after the Depression. They grew up in a saving world, and the boomers do that to some extent. But the later boomers and the Gen Xers don't necessarily have that depth of resources that were just expected. You don't necessarily have that company you retired from after working for them for 30 years and they give you this wonderful pension with all these great medical benefits. Things are changing.
Yeah, I mean, when my great grandmother was living with my great aunt, you know, everybody built their own house literally with their own hands because that's what you did then. You built your own house, so it was paid for. Their big issue was paying taxes. And you fast forward to 2020, you know, a lot of people come from up north to Florida and they pay for, you know, they sell their house for $500,000, move to Florida, buy a $300,000 house, and they have that cushion in their savings. But like you say, when you're paying somebody to bathe and cook and mow the lawn and all this other stuff, the financial situation, and we're going to look at that in a second. The reality, and for insurance, you need to look at your health insurance, you need to look at your life insurance, all your insurance. And one of the big things that when you turn 65 is health insurance, getting the best health insurance you can that covers the most, because if you're living longer, you're going to need care, and having better insurance is really good. That's just one of my hot buttons as an insurance agent. It makes me crazy when people make choices just based on today. You know, I'm 65, there's nothing wrong with me. Well, this decision has impacts for when you're 75 as well. So, reality versus desire, you know, reality is brutal. You know, we'd all like to just live in a, you know, lap luxury, but we can't. Physical, emotional, and mental well-being changes over time. Physical, obvious, that's easy, but emotional tolls also come into effect because of hormone changes and just the toll of living with a chronic illness for years. Takes an emotional and mental toll on the body, and they have physical ramifications. And in COVID, we saw how the mental status of seniors was really impacted with the isolation and the shutdown. There's been huge impacts to
And it
the
still hasn't gone
physical
away.
well-being.
Yeah, we're still dealing with it, and we're looking at most likely things not getting any better in the next few months, and we're all really tired of it. But it could be easily another 4 or 5 months or longer before we're really out to looking at going back to playing mahjong every week. You know?
Yeah, the isolation really had a mental impact on the mental well-being of
Right.
seniors and everybody, but especially seniors, because they didn't have work to distract them, or they lost a job because nobody, you know, it's not safe for them to be out like they were. Safety factors, as we age, not only does our mental abilities decline, but our physical abilities decline. And we have to be more cognizant of safety factors in our surroundings. Medical conditions crop up and we have issues. And then here's the infographic. I think I can share that. And this is really hitting all the buttons. Your finances, this is long-term care, and long-term care is anything over and beyond what Medicare provides. And Medicare doesn't provide a whole lot. So they manage instances of acute issues, but they don't manage long-term impacts. So where you live, whether you live in a house or in an assisted living or a condo, your mental health has an impact on your long-term care. You know, there are a lot of psych issues that crop up in seniors that have had psychological issues that they've managed their whole life, and as they age, they can't manage them anymore. You outlive your funds. I can't tell you how many 90, 95-year-olds who I did everything right. I saved, I planned, I prepared, and my house was paid for, and this and that, and it's gone now. And, you know, they've sold their house. They use that to live in assisted living, independent living, and now they're at the end of those funds. And what do? Your physical health obviously has an impact. The loss of a spouse, that's usually a very big event, not just emotionally, but financially, because a lot of the boomers had two-person incomes. And when you lose half of that income, it really impacts the one that's left behind. A lot of people don't think of that when they do their financial planning for long-term care. Because then nobody wants to think about losing a spouse, but it's something that one of them is going to go first. And advanced directives, you know, healthcare surrogate, living will, you need to have those conversations with your the people that you designate for that. And sometimes it can't be family. You know,
Right.
if there's such a disrupted, disconnected, dysfunctional family. I mean, we've all seen the movies, you know, the Christmas and Thanksgiving movies where the dysfunctional family gets together. If you don't want that dysfunction when you're going through a major health event or the end of life,
Right.
you need to think about not having one of those children as your healthcare surrogate. You know, have somebody, a professional in that role. They're not going to exclude the family, but they're going to make the decisions easier because they're not part of that family connection. I mean, that's a whole subject.
Yeah.
The reality of the situation, you might have the money and you might have the desire, but the reality is you just can't live the way you want to live because of your health condition. And so
Right.
you have to take into effect the reality of it. Or you might be healthy, but you have no money. And
Right.
so sometimes you have to just look at the big picture. And I know we've all heard this, but looking at it sooner than later and understanding the reality of it will help you in the long run.
Right.
And so that's important. And there are items unique to you. You know, sometimes people have pets or they have certain desires and wishes that they want, and those are paramount. I talked earlier, so you have a 90-year-old who can't, you know, cut the grass anymore. They can't push the lawnmower, or they're 85 and they're getting to the point where they're struggling. Well, their quality of life depends on seeing their friends at the beach for their 8 o'clock morning walk. Well, rearranging their whole life so that they can go to the beach every morning at 8 o'clock and walk the beach and use that energy that it takes to do that as an 85-year-old or a 90-year-old and be not as functional the rest of the day, that's their choice and their critical event. So they pay someone to cut the grass and to clean the house because for them, that walk on the beach is life. That's
Right.
giving them quality. So these are things that are unique to you that, you know, nobody can tell you how to live, but you have to prioritize things because you can't do it all. And then your family and friends, you know, who are they? Are they really there for you? And, you know, if they're all gone because you've outlived them, then there's a factor there.
Well, the other piece is that we hadn't even touched on are all of the people that are, you know, I have friends and families members that, you know, I talk to them and they're still supporting their adult children. So, you know, who is going to, you know, how is that conversation going to happen? I mean, you know, some family members are, friends of mine are supporting their kids in a greater capacity than others, but you know, lots of my cohorts in my age range, and I'm 60, still have financial responsibilities to people other than themselves and their spouses, you know.
Yeah, and if you're 72 and you're raising your grandkids, that's
Yep.
not a easy thing. That's not a cheap endeavor.
No.
It takes a toll financially, mentally, physically. That's something that's a reality. I volunteer with a dog rescue, and we had a volunteer that fostered dogs in the rescue, and she was in her 70s, and her great grandson had to come live with her, where she chose to take him in when her granddaughter couldn't take care of him anymore. So that's a hard thing to do, and that was a sacrifice for her, but you know, that was a priority for her. And so these things happen, and our lives are not easy. Like, I hate to say it was simpler, because it wasn't simpler in the 50s, but it was simpler in ways. There's just, I don't know what the right word is, but it was different then. People had a different sense of responsibility and accountability, and the world was different. So it's hard to compare them.
Yeah, I think the world was, I think we were less global back then. Our world was more compact. We had everything's just so much more complex nowadays. People's jobs, where they live, what they're doing, all of the things that impact our lives are such different scale than what I remember growing up.
Yeah, definitely. So understand the reality of your limitations based on mental and physical ailments. Look at community resources. We're going to go into that more. Transportation, support for specific conditions. You got to make sure you're not vulnerable. Vulnerability prevention. I mean, that's huge in Florida, the vulnerable seniors.
Yeah.
There are going to be transitions when you have a major heart attack or something like that. You may never be the same. So, like you said, you need to think about it before you're having to make the decision on how this could affect you. And you need to be realistic. Living at home is great, but it requires certain things to be safe and successful. Living in assisted living isn't the right thing for everybody. Everybody is unique. It's
Right.
scary, it's overwhelming, it's not natural to feel so vulnerable. It's like living with the hurricane threat every day of your life when you get one of these major illnesses. So, that's scary, it's overwhelming. You need to take care of the caregiver. The person that's taking care of somebody is as important as the person they're taking care of. And so you both need to look at it realistically, what you can and cannot do, because one person cannot do it all.
Really?
You have to, yeah. I fess up. I give up. I've been down that road. It does not work. I can tell you.
Absolutely. Nice German family. I carry all my groceries in on one trip, and nobody needs to help me.
Yeah, I don't do that anymore. I've given up.
That's
Quality versus quantity. We've talked a little bit about just because we can with modern medicine doesn't mean we should. Here, I'll just mention it because it's a different subject, but many people I run into were on 15, 20 pills a day. And that medication is keeping them alive. And you have to decide whether the side effects and the impacts of that treatment is worth the quantity versus the quality of life. Because
everybody's
every
going to make those decisions themselves. Everybody's going to make those decisions themselves.
Yeah. So for some people, it's the right thing. For other people, it's not. You have to decide for yourself. And your spouse may want quantity and you may want quality. And so everybody's unique. And you have to respect the decision that somebody makes. But if you're the caregiver, you also have a right to your own life and the way you want to live. So this isn't an easy, we're going to talk about it over dinner and then we're going to be done. This is a process. This is working through the issues, and it's, something that needs to happen over time. Be reasonable. Nothing is perfect. You can't be unrealistic. If you're 78 years old and you're taking care of your 82-year-old husband, you might need help because he's bedridden and you can't get him out of bed. And you need to accept that you need help for that. Whether you like that or he likes that, it's safer to have help for that, because
Right.
you may not be able to do that safely, and you need to think about that. You can't be unrealistic. So when I talk to people, and it's hard. I mean, it is hard to talk to your mother or your father or your whoever about this. It is just hard. So I say, think about it for yourself first. You know, put yourself, if I was in that situation, this is, you know, think about it. You're not in that situation, so you have clarity. Think about the subject overall, the whole aging process. Think about your specific opinions and your own desires. Think about who would decide for you. And when do you want someone to decide for you? When do you want to start asking for help? It will be needed. We will all need help. There's a statistic, I have another presentation I put together, and 70% of the seniors in 2018, anyone that's going to be over 65, will need 2 years of long-term care before they die. 70%.
That's exactly what my dad needed. He was in a skilled nursing facility for a little under 2 years. Yes.
And in 2020, 70% of the people that are aging just 2 years later, the number is now 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're getting better at treating it and recognizing when people need treatment and intervening earlier. So 70% of us are going to need long-term care for more than 2 or 3 years. So document it, write it down. It's going to feel weird, but it gives you perspective. And it makes you think about how you're going to live your life day to day. So think about it for yourself. And then if you're a caregiver, after you've gone through that, you need to talk about it with the person that needs it, who's avoiding it, that you're the caregiver for, and you're going to be the one making the decisions for this person. Talk to them about your plan. First, you have to just say, okay, it's here, I have to do it. So I'm going to do it for myself. And then I'm going to talk to them about it so that they can see that I'm worried about it for myself and that they need to think about these things for themselves. And usually either the caregiver or the one being cared for is in denial. One of them is and one of them isn't. So whoever that is needs to be the first one to jump off and get into this subject. So ask them for their opinions. You know, this is what I want for me if blah, blah, blah. What would you want for yourself? You know, you're not making the decisions for them. They have, if they're in a chronic illness or they have chronic medical issues and you're caregiving for them, then they've lost as much independence as anyone, and they need to have as much control as they can of the things that they still have control about. And these decisions are one of those things. So ask them to think about these things and decide for themselves, because you don't want to be the one making the decisions for them or somebody else making the decision for them. So ask them to give you the information so that you know what it is that they want. You know, I've supported families where somebody had a stroke, and, you know, the persons that had the stroke didn't want to live and be bedridden, and they could have survived the stroke. You know, they did survive the stroke. And there was two choices. You know, there was keep them alive and they'll be bedridden because they're not going to get over this stroke, but they'll be alive and they will have a quality of life, but it'll be this way. And they did not want that. And they were adamant. and it was awful. And the family didn't have anything in place, and they were fighting each other, you know, and it was like they called us in to be a mediator, so to speak, between the one that had the stroke and the family that was making the decisions. And we had to, you know, come to an understanding that met everybody's needs. So if you haven't talked to somebody about that, then they may not make the decision that you want them to make. So
Right.
think about it for yourself, and then approach the person that you're caring for. And I can't give you the answer. There is no the answer. There is no right answer.
Well, you should, because that would be so much easier, Corina.
I know. The government is there to help, but it's not there to help in ways that you might want. So if you're going on Medicaid, Medicaid is a program, and Medicaid has limits, and this is what they offer, and that's what you get. So if you want to have as much of what you want, you need to prepare for it. You need to think about it and prepare for it, because once you're depending on the government or somebody else to make those decisions, you may not get what you want. And there are 100 different things. I always say, come up with 3 plans. I went through this with my aunt. She fell, had a traumatic brain injury, and she had been independent. She was on the verge of not being safe on her own, but she wouldn't listen to anybody. She fell, cracked her skull open. Well, she didn't crack it open. That was the problem. She fell, woke up, and was throwing up from a concussion, and she had fractured her skull, but she called and said, I'm throwing up. I have a stomach bug. So she went to the hospital, and they're treating her for a stomach issue because she's throwing up blood, and nobody noticed for almost 48 hours that the back of her head was out to here, and she had a little small amount of blood, and they did a CAT scan, and she actually had 3 fractures.
Oh my gosh.
Skull fractures in various stages of healing. And so she had had 3 major falls, did not recognize that she fell, and just woke up and said, oh, that's weird. I just woke up on the floor. And it didn't occur to her that she had fallen. And so she ended up with 3 plans. And she didn't want those 3 plans. She wanted plan D. And plan D was not safe and wasn't appropriate. And it was a struggle. And we said, here's 3 plans. And you have to, these are the options, and this, you have to pick one. You're the one who's going to pick how you proceed from here, but these are the choices. So plan D is out of the picture. We don't have plan D. We have plan A, B, and C. And you can pick the one that you want. And that's, you know, that's what you have to do. You have to limit the choices, do the best you can, and just move on. And it's harder if you're reactive and reacting to each event as it occurs. So planning and being prepared is good. Better, you have more choices. Take care of the caregiver. Have a plan for when the caregiver isn't there. If the if the caregiver goes to Publix, has a car accident, is on the way to the hospital in the ambulance, and there's somebody at home on a ventilator, somebody needs to, you know, there needs to be a plan.
Right.
One person cannot do it all. Think about quantity versus quality and what's more important to you, and what quality and quantity look like to you, because they mean different things to different people. Be reasonable. Nothing is perfect. And be honest with yourself. Be honest with the doctors. Be honest with the caregiver. Be honest with the people that come in and support you in your situation. denying the truth isn't going to help. It's just going to put you in a reactive situation. So there is no right answer, but there is a right for you. There's an optimal for you, and there's a not so optimal for you. But, you know, nothing's ever going to be perfect unless we're, you know, rich and can have whatever we want whenever we want. And then, you know, that's not even a perfect situation usually. So the good news, now that we're all depressed, is that there's more options than ever. And if you act early, you can prevent a big event, and you can live independent, solo, long. There's alert bracelet. There's the daily phone calls. You can move in with somebody. There's independent living, assisted living, skilled nursing. There's in-home care. There's devices. You know, there's more devices than anyone cares to mention. There's medication reminders. There's delivery systems. We took advantage of that pretty good during COVID. There's video monitoring, which a lot of people don't like, but you know, there's a lot to be said for video monitoring that can help somebody live independent longer. And there's portable versions of assisted devices. You know, if you were on oxygen 10 years ago, you hardly ever left your house. Now they have those little oxygen concentrators. You can walk around and do whatever you want. There's help available. Get an assessment from the outside, daycare, respite, guardianship. In the community, there's Aging Matters. There are a wealth of information. 211 Brevard, your insurance, your health insurance. Know what your benefits are. There's shared living situations. This is a huge thing right now. The silver house sharing. There's websites dedicated to this where you rent a room from somebody or rent a room to somebody in response to them supporting you or just being there so that somebody knows you're alive. It's when you don't need something, but you might need it, it's worth reaching out before you need it. So understand how Aging Matters works. Understand how the community resources work. Get on the waiting list. If you're living independent, you have no family, you're going to need long-term care, you have $80,000 in the bank, but you're using it at $5,000 a clip every month at an ALF, you need to contact Senior Resource Alliance and you need to get on the list. You may not be number one, because over here you can see there's up to 64,000 people on that long-term care list for community long-term care. But if you get on, then you're on the list and they check on you every year. And when your money goes away, then bubble up, bubble up, bubble up. Isle of Life, it's a Brevard County Fire Rescue Initiative. It helps you document all this stuff on a single piece of paper. The Hurricane Special Needs Shelters, you need to be aware of those and what they provide if they're appropriate. Read the magazines, understand the programs, look at the Elder Affairs website, the Senior Resource Alliance website, the Florida ACA website, DCF. We talked about that earlier, where we're a mandatory reporting state. You don't have to go right to DCF to report issues, but if they need to be reported, they should be reported. And a lot of places take these pro bono cases when there's no finances. Talk to your doctor about the reality of your situation. As you notice changes, don't hide them from your doctor. If you're starting to have memory issues, go to the memory clinic, get a baseline memory screening, do your advanced directives. You can do these online for free at the Florida Healthcare website. They have samples. If you just Google advanced directives, because people don't know what that means, well, there's a wealth of resources out there that show you what you need to think about in terms of medical aspects, and you can just get them notarized. So these are all things these are literally free or income based, the fee is income based, that are available to you. And then of course, if there's money available, you can always pay. The one thing I recommend is don't go it alone. The insurance, your health insurance usually has benefits that you're not aware of. If you call the 800 number, the people on the phone aren't going to know that. But if you go to Aetna.com or UnitedHealthcare.com, whatever your insurance is, and you create an account there and log in, you'll get resources that are free to you because you have that Medicare insurance. So do that, and be active and out in the community, and recognize that you're not alone, even though you're aging solo or you're a caregiver for somebody and you're feeling isolated. We're all going to age solo, but you don't have to be alone. Ta-da!
Ta-da! Ta-da! Is there one more? Is there one more slide?
That's just the last one, which is think, plan, talk. Think, plan, talk. That's my mantra.
And then also the, your contact information, Corina. People who want to find out more, I'm sure they can get a hold of you, and that's what you do for a living. So part of what it is we talked about today is, possibly think about engaging the services of professionals. We all there's so many times in our lives where we look to professionals for different things that we're going through. Why it is we hesitate to do that in this stage of our life is a source of amazement to me. I mean, when Mike and I decided to buy our first house, we didn't just go up to a house with and say, okay, hey, can we buy your house? We engaged a realtor. We were talking to lawyers. Same sort of thing that when we were, when we had our kids and our kids were taught by teachers, and so you were always engaging professionals. I don't diagnose my own illnesses. I go to a professional. So there's lots of times where people need to think about, hey, is there somebody here that does this for a living, that can do this without the emotion, and that can really that's working for me. And that's what I think you do, right, Corina?
Yeah, that's one of the things we do is make what we call aging plans or care plans, and we do assessments. We get all up in your business. We ask all the awful questions, all those bubbles on that bubble diagram we saw. And you don't have to give us the information, but we ask you to get the information for all those things. And then once you pull all that together, then we ask questions and then help you formulate a plan for yourself.
That's great.
A lot of times we get called when the emergency happens, and that's normal, but if you can plan for something, then that emergency is less of an emergency. It's just an event. It's like a tropical storm instead of a hurricane.
Well, I thank you so very much, Corina, for being with me today. And I hope to, at some point, we're going to get Sunflower House back up online. Sunflower House is a service of Aging Matters in Brevard, and we're at the Merritt Square Mall. And once we finally we're taping this in November of 2020. Once we get this whole Corona thing behind us, we're going to be able to go back to live in-person presentations, and I look forward to Corina coming and doing this presentation live at the Sunflower House. I thank you so very much today.
Thank you for having me. It was great.